Hey guys, tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on charisma gone toxic, where smiles sell lies, family turns fatal, and reality checks come with a hammer. You're stepping into two true crime stories that start with smooth talk and end in things you probably won't survive. Especially if your name's on a will or your brother has secrets. First, we're off to Taiwan, where it's humid, the tea is sweet, and the seminars come with a side of fraud. There's this woman Ding, just Ding, no last name, because apparently, once you've branded yourself as a millionaire mentor and Wall Street prodigy, surnames are optional. She struts into rooms like a stock market phoenix, freshly risen from her own legend. Custom heels, bright white teeth, a PowerPoint deck polished within an inch of its life. You don't question her resume, mostly because she waves around names like Warren Buffett, George Soros, and something about her time with Lehman Brothers before the collapse. Of course, if you actually check, historians still argue whether she even visited Wall Street, let alone worked there. But no one's checking. Not yet. You see, Ding doesn't just sell financial advice. She sells identity for N to $250. That was in a weekend. That's over 8,000 USD. You two can sit in a cold hotel ballroom with 600 others, chanting, "Wealth is mindset," like it's a gospel. There's always someone crying, always someone raising their hand to share a story of personal triumph, usually involving how Ding helped them buy a third apartment or taught them the 3 secrets Buffett never revealed. What they don't tell you, most of the testimonials are recycled. Ding allegedly paid some early students to act as glowing success stories. A fringe Taiwanese podcast once joked, she was more Hollywood than Wall Street, which is almost a compliment. The set design helps the illusion. There's never a crease in her silk dress, never a slide out of place. Even her voice mid-pitch, just raspy enough to feel trustworthy, wraps around the room like warm tar. It's cult-like, but cozy, until you ask for a refund. One student did after investing in her Elite Futures mentorship. He realized the charts she used were screenshots from Investopedia, and her strategies sounded suspiciously like basic gambling. When he asked questions during a seminar, Ding smiled, nodded, and had him removed from the event for energy disruption. Turns out, Ding had never held a certified license in any form of finance, trading, or investment advising. She wasn't just self-made, she was self-invented. Mainstream outlets began sniffing around, and that's where history comes in. Taiwan has no shortage of financial scams. The 1980s saw a spike in so-called money temples, where religious language was blended with pyramid schemes. Historians still debate whether these movements were grassroots financial rebellions, or just old-school cons with incense and better fonts. Ding was more modern. She offered lifestyle, dream fulfillment, investment guides with photos of her vacation office in Bali, later proven to be a rented Airbnb for the shoot. By the time the government finally froze her assets and pressed charges, she had amassed millions, a good chunk of it untraceable. And through it all, in the front row of every seminar, sat her mother, Thang. A quiet woman, always in beige, always nodding. Thang didn't speak on stage, but she moved like someone who owned the floor. No one suspected then what mother and daughter were building together. Not just a financial empire, but something much darker. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and your local time. I love seeing how wide this little bedtime cult of ours really is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a hotel ballroom again, only now the chandeliers are dimmer, and the energy's desperate. Ding's seminars have reached peak saturation 2-day boot camps in Taipei, Kaohsiung, and even overseas pop-ups in Singapore. She sells herself as a globe-trotting oracle of prosperity, the Asian Oprah of options trading. But you're starting to notice the cracks. The chairs are still gold-trimmed. The music still swells when she enters, but the crowd's different now. Fewer eager college grads, more middle-aged parents with mortgages and notebooks filled with color-coded highlighters. They're here for salvation, not insight. You sit through day 1, the 7 mindsets of a market winner. Ding paces in front of a giant LED screen, quoting Warren Buffett while mispronouncing derivative like it's a new energy drink. Day 2 is all about the upsell. VIP mentorship, private sessions, portfolio audits. A weekend package where Ding reviews your investments personally for an extra NT 80,000. You never actually get the audit, just a PDF with vague compliments. Like your mindset shows exponential potential. But here's the weird part. It works. People leave crying, hugging each other like they've just been spiritually reborn. A mother from Tainan donates her daughter's college fund. A florist sells her van to buy crypto Ding recommended during lunch break. Nobody wants to admit they've been duped, and Ding knows it. She builds the seminars like a casino. The lights disorient. The schedule is packaged so tightly, you forget to eat. There's always someone clapping, someone running to the stage to share their win. And remember, Thene, Ding's mom, she's quietly handling the money. She takes payments in cash, through bank apps, and sometimes strangely through gift cards. Thane never smiles. She watches everything. Now, here's where history gives us déjà vu. In 19th century France, the infamous con artist Victor Lustig sold the Eiffel Tower twice, each time with perfect paperwork, a confident voice, and the same principle. People don't want to know they've been scammed, especially if it makes them feel smart. That's what Ding masters. She doesn't promise certainty. She promises you'll feel like you know something other people don't. Historians still argue whether she believed her own game or if she just loved the applause too much to stop. By 2017, she was on billboards, holding books she didn't write, flashing stock tickers she barely understood. And every time she walked off stage, her mother was there with a warm towel and a manila envelope. That's when things shifted. The seminars got more aggressive, more pushy. Than started pre-screening people at the door. Only those who had already committed to a higher level were led into smaller, intensive growth sessions. She was building exclusivity, a velvet rope for financial enlightenment. Until the rope snapped, a young couple, recently married, sold their apartment to follow Ding's strategies. When the market dipped, they lost everything. No refunds, no phone calls returned. They left a heartbreaking Facebook post and vanished from the online group. Other students began questioning the curriculum. Why were the slides identical from course to course? Why was Ding's exclusive investment strategy eerily similar to what you'd find on free YouTube channels? One brave soul filed a formal complaint with Taiwan's Financial Supervisory Commission, and like a loose thread in a silk scarf, once tugged, everything unraveled. Investigators found no record of Ding ever registering as a licensed financial consultant. Her degrees were unverified. Her mentorship certifications were printed at a copy shop 2 blocks from her apartment. Thang, meanwhile, had been quietly routing seminar income through 5 different shell accounts. By 2018, Ding was arrested. Not for murder, not yet, just for garden variety fraud and investment violations. She wept dramatically in front of cameras, and oddly, so did some of her followers. Because when the illusion finally cracks, you're not just angry, you're grieving. A quirky sidebar. In 18th century Japan, there was a woman named Kajiya who claimed she could summon lost relatives' financial spirits to offer investment advice. She was eventually exiled not for lying, but for emotional corruption. Historians still debate what that phrase really meant. Maybe it meant this: betrayal cloaked in comfort is harder to heal from than outright theft. Ding went to prison. Thon visited every week. But here's the thing. The mother-daughter duo wasn't done. Behind bars or not, they were about to scheme again. This time, it wouldn't be slideshows and stage lights. This time, it would be blood. You think prison might break someone like Ding, but Ding isn't someone. Ding is a brand. And brands don't break. They pivot. 6 months into her sentence, she starts sending out letters handwritten, neat as stock charts. She claims she's a political target, that she's writing a new book, that the truth will come out. Meanwhile, her mother Than, she's out there working the edges, holding onto assets, shuffling properties, visiting Ding in prison like clockwork. It's during this lull, this so-called reflection period, that the next character enters the scene. Auntie. Her name was never released publicly, but she was Than's older sister, older by enough years to have accumulated a fair amount of wealth, a family house in Tainan. some ancestral land, and a stack of savings built quietly over decades. Auntie had no children, but what she did have was a will, and Ding and Than wanted it. You feel the air shift. It's not about crowds anymore, not about applause or personal branding or Instagram-worthy retreats. It's about inheritance, quiet power, family secrets, and family secrets. They rot like old mangoes in the sun. At first, it's subtle. Than starts visiting her sister more often, offering help with paperwork, suggesting changes to legal documents for efficiency. Then comes a surprise move. Adoption. Than and Ding try to adopt Auntie legally on paper to become closer. Family. Though they're already related, it's a loophole in Taiwan's inheritance law. With the right signatures, adopted children could claim equal rights to an estate. Historians still argue whether that provision was meant for kindness or manipulation. But Auntie isn't stupid. She resists. She says no, and that's when the tone changes. Suddenly, Auntie falls down a flight of stairs. She says she slipped, but the railing's intact. No sign of rain. The light bulb was freshly changed. A month later, she wakes up groggy after dinner, claims her drink tasted odd. Doctors find no poison, but friends note how shaken she is, how quiet she's become. Then there's the forged signature on a property contract. Auntie finds it, confronts Than. There's yelling, doors slammed, then silence. Than disappears from her life for weeks. But you know better. You know they're not giving up. They're regrouping. This part of the story feels like something out of a 1930s noir novel. Greedy heirs, a lonely widow, suspicious legal documents. In fact, during the Great Depression, American courts saw a spike in inheritance-related crimes. With wealth drying up, families turned on each other. Poisonings, forgeries, disappearances. Historians still debate if it was desperation or the sudden visibility of what had always been lurking beneath. In Taiwan, it's no different. One day, Auntie opens her door and sees Than standing there. Beside her, Ding, fresh out of prison. The visit is brief, polite, awkward, but afterward, Auntie tells a friend she doesn't feel safe. She asks to change her locks, and then nothing for a while. Weeks of calm until the stairwell. It's mid-morning. Bright sun. Auntie's coming home from errands. As she climbs the stairs to her apartment, she hears footsteps behind her, then a sharp crack, then another, then the pain. She collapses before she understands what hit her. Blood pools on tile. A hammer clatters beside her. She's alive, but barely. A neighbor finds her, screaming. The police arrive. And guess what's waiting just inside the building's security camera footage? Than and Ding, trying not to look at the camera, but looking anyway. There's a saying in forensic psychology, guilt has a gait. People walk differently when they're about to lie, steal, or kill. Their body knows before their mouth does. The investigation is swift. The hammer, traced to a hardware shop 2 blocks from Ding's old seminar venue, paid for in cash. The fingerprints, Ding's, the motive. A paper trail of falsified adoption records and forged wills. They didn't just want Auntie out of the way. They wanted her legacy rewritten. But Auntie, bruised and broken, lived. She testified, clearly, loudly, and the story shattered into the public square like a dropped teacup. You wake up to headlines. They're everywhere, red banners across morning news tickers, furious black ink on tabloids, digital threads exploding on Taiwan's version of Reddit. Mother-daughter duo, sentenced for attempted murder of elderly relative over inheritance. The photos hit different this time. Ding isn't in heels, no makeup team, no LED screens behind her, just handcuffs, a blank stare, and her mother beside her in a wrinkled beige coat, eyes hollow like someone who's finally run out of rewrites. But the courtroom is where the real unraveling happens. You're there in the back row, maybe feeling the way tension sticks to air-conditioned air like static. Than doesn't speak much. When she does, her voice is flat, like she's reading grocery prices. She admits she visited her sister, denies hitting her, says she was concerned about her health. Ding, on the other hand, Performs, she cries. She blames stress. She talks about miscommunication and misunderstood intentions. She even references her past media success, claiming the attack has been blown out of proportion by tabloids. The judge isn't amused. Neither is the aunt. She takes the stand slowly, still recovering, walking with a cane, and tells the courtroom about her sister's change, about the day the hammer came down, about hearing her niece whisper, "Just let go already." It's chilling. The room doesn't breathe for 20 seconds. A court-appointed psychiatrist testifies next, describing a shared psychosis between Ding and Than, how codependency can sometimes tip into mutual delusion. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon, sometimes called folie à deux, is born from love or control. Either way, the verdict comes quickly. 9 years, each not life, not death penalty, but prison. And not just for attempted murder, for fraud, for conspiracy, for falsifying legal documents, and financial deception going back years. The courtroom gasps again when the judge reads the full list. It's like peeling paint from a supposedly pristine wall and finding mold all the way down. Here's your quirky historical callback. In ancient Rome, inheritance was so sacred that tampering with a will was punished by exile or worse. Public shame rituals involving torn togas and donkey parades. Ding and Than get no togas, but the shame sticks just fine. The media devours them. Ding's old students come forward with angry blog posts and tearful YouTube videos. "She stole my mother's pension. She told me debt was a mindset." Than disappears from the public eye after the sentencing. But Ding, she still tries to stay relevant from her cell. A leaked prison letter shows she's working on a memoir. She calls it the Phoenix Method. How I rose, fell, and will rise again. Even in disgrace, she's branding, and somewhere, in some corner of the internet, someone's probably still waiting for her next course. Because that's the strange thing about belief. It lingers. Even after the facts are stacked like bricks, even after the blood's cleaned up, even after the hammer's locked away in evidence, belief is stickier than guilt. A few months after sentencing, Auntie moves out of her old apartment. She never publicly comments again, and maybe that's the point. The crime isn't just what happened in the stairwell. It's everything that came before the paper cuts of betrayal, the casual rewrites of truth, the small, sharp edges of a family-turned weapon. When you look back, it was always coming. The seminars, the sunglasses, the staged testimonials. You just didn't hear the hammer yet. Now, you cross the ocean, different time zone, different tragedy, but the same familiar ache. You're in Georgia. The summer heat clings to your neck like syrup and static, and everything smells like dry grass, spilled gasoline, and something just faintly wrong. This is where you meet Candace. Smart, focused, the kind of woman who doesn't just walk into a room, she enters like punctuation. She's a single mom, law student, first-generation college goer, and the kind of person who says things like, "I'm not afraid of anyone, especially when I know I'm right." The kind of person who doesn't just speak her truth, she files it in triplicate. You find her working late, baby asleep in the next room. Legal briefs scattered across the bed, a highlighter tucked behind her ear like a badge of honor. It's 2006. Candace is 26, and in just a few months, she'll be found under that same bed, shot, hidden, cold. But tonight, she's still alive, still texting her brother James. James is trouble, not always violent but volatile, unstable, known to walk out of rooms mid-sentence, known to scream at shadows, then apologize with flowers. He's also Candace's pressure point. She's tried for years to keep him afloat, clean his record, get him medication, offer job contacts from her law school network, but there's only so much she can do. The week before she dies, they fight. Neighbors overhear shouting. James slams a car door so hard the mirror falls off. Candace tells a friend she's done protecting people who can't even protect themselves. Then there's Officer Robert, a local cop with a file that reads like spilled ink. Accusations of profiling, internal complaints. One major dispute involving James just 2 years earlier. Candace had written a formal complaint against him. It didn't go anywhere, but Robert didn't forget. So when Candace goes missing, and her toddler's found wandering the hallway barefoot, crying for mama, guess who people start whispering about? Not James. Not at first, but Robert. Because here's the historical twist. Georgia's police system in the early 2000s had just begun implementing body cam tech and citizen review boards, but enforcement was inconsistent. Historians still argue whether it was reform or just the illusion of one. And in a town where law enforcement trust already ran thin, Robert's name on anything meant suspicion. So when the body is found stuffed beneath her own bed, with 4 bullets in her chest, public anger snaps like a wet wire. Protests ignite. Candlelight vigils multiply. One viral flyer reads, "Who watches the badge?" Robert is questioned, loudly, aggressively. But he has an alibi. No physical evidence links him. No fingerprints. No surveillance. He walks, and the case goes cold for years, until someone watches an old TV show, not a crime show, a cold case show. The kind with grainy reenactments, soft narration, and forgotten files pulled out of dusty police boxes. And suddenly, Candace is more than a headline. She's a segment, a story, a new chance for someone to finally listen. You're sitting on your couch now, popcorn going stale in your lap, watching that cold case TV show like it's background noise. But then the narrator says her name, Candace, and suddenly the room gets quiet. There she is again, her smile in an old graduation photo, her baby in her lap, her case unsolved, her brother mentioned only briefly, and Robert still out there. The show interviews neighbors, former classmates, one old professor who calls her the most determined person I've ever taught. But then something strange happens. One of the producers, an ex-forensic consultant, decides to dig deeper, not just into police records, but into the family. You don't expect what they find, not in a dusty cardboard box, not under Mayeski evidence. But there it is, a whiskey bottle, found near the bed frame, never tested. Turns out, the original detective didn't send it for DNA because it didn't feel relevant. Feelings don't hold up in court, but they hold up investigations. The new team runs it. And what comes back? A partial fingerprint and a trace saliva DNA match. Not Robert's, James's. It hits like a dropped mirror. Suddenly, everything's up for review. The gun used in the murder, traced back to a series of neighborhood thefts. Guess who had been caught stealing similar weapons 2 months before Candace was killed? Guess who pawned a TV the next day bought with the same cash traced back to her missing purse? Guess who was seen by a neighbor pacing around her apartment complex the night before her body was discovered? James, the brother she defended, protected, carried, and maybe feared. You think back to those old text messages, the arguments, the silence, and it starts to make sense in that awful, crawling way. Here's your fringe history fact. In the Middle Ages, trial by ordeal involved throwing suspects into rivers. If they floated, they were guilty. If they drowned, innocent. Historians still argue whether this was ever about justice or just about washing away doubt. James floats now, to the top of the suspect list. But there's a problem. The DNA match is partial. The gun is long gone. The evidence is strong but not airtight. So instead of murder charges, the DA goes for something else. Public endangerment, possession of illegal firearms, tampering with evidence. The sentence, 5 years. It's not justice, but it's not silence either. You watch the family fracture in real time. A cousin screams in court. An aunt refuses to speak to anyone. And the baby, now a teenager, sits in the hallway outside the courtroom, headphones in, staring at a wall like it's safer than looking at what's left of her family. Because what do you do when the monster didn't come from the outside? What if it lived with you, ate your food, shared your blood? Now you're in the hallway again. Same courthouse, same peeling linoleum tiles, different. Silence. James is in cuffs, baggy orange jumpsuit, blank stare like the inside of a turned-off television. But the hallway feels heavier now, not because of the sentence, but because of everything it didn't fix. 5 years. That's not justice. That's paperwork. Candace is still dead. The hole she left isn't filled. It's framed. And the town, still whispering, still asking, why didn't we see it sooner? You walk through old case notes like they're ashes, and you find them tiny, fragile red flags left behind like crumbs. The time Candace asked for a restraining order but dropped it the next day. The voicemail she left her professor. If anything happens to me, it'll be someone close. The missing week in James's therapy schedule. The witness who saw him with a scratch on his cheek. All of it there, none of it loud enough. Historians still argue whether the collapse of a family is more forensic or emotional. Whether trauma builds like sediment or shatters like glass. In this case, it did both. Let's pause for something strange. In 1935, an American psychologist studying patterns in family homicide found that most domestic crimes weren't crimes of passion. They were crimes of perception. Someone felt unseen, betrayed, replaced. James, by all accounts, adored his sister until he didn't, until the pills stopped working, until the voices came back, until he thought she was the enemy. You picture it. Candace, studying, baby asleep. A knock at the door. Maybe she lets him in. Maybe she doesn't have a choice. Maybe she knew before the first shot. He hides her under the bed. A choice that feels less like concealment and more like denial. Like even in that final act, he didn't want to see her fully gone. The whiskey bottle. He takes one swig, maybe more, leaves it. That's the part that always sticks. The bottle wasn't thrown away. It was left just barely out of sight, like a subconscious confession. Or maybe he wanted to be caught. Some killers do. Because guilt is a strange kind of gravity, it pulls you down eventually. And when you're family, there's no clean escape. After sentencing, James doesn't speak. Not to the press, not to family, not to the teenager who once called him Uncle Jay. He just vanishes into the system. 5 years. But for the rest of them, the sentence never ends. Now the stories begin to echo across oceans, across cultures, across crimes. Ding, sitting in her Taiwanese prison cell, still trying to reinvent herself in letters. James, locked away in Georgia, sitting in silence, saying nothing at all. Different prisons, same ghosts, because at the root of both stories is something colder than greed, louder than violence, something sticky and slow and impossible to scrub clean. Betrayal, the kind that grows from inside the house. You think back to Than, her eyes scanning a room like a spreadsheet, her voice steady even as she plotted her own sister's death. And you think of Candace, trying to save a brother who'd already started imagining her as the enemy. The people we love most, they know how to hurt us best. You're standing in a press room now, a quiet one. It's months after Ding's sentencing, and reporters are still chasing her legend. They dig up old footage of her seminars, her voice pitched just right, her words falling like sugar cubes into bitter tea. People still comment, she changed my mindset. She helped me believe in myself. She might have made mistakes, but she meant well. That's the power of performance. And ding, she knew her audience better than she knew herself. Here's a curious historical gem. In the 1500s, Italian con artists used a trick called La Maschera del Santo, the Mask of the Saint. They'd pretend to be holy men giving financial advice, even after being unmasked. Some followers still donated, convinced it was a test of faith. Historians still argue whether that's stupidity or loyalty, or maybe both. That's what haunts these cases. Not just the crimes, but how many people wanted to believe. Auntie believed her sister wouldn't hurt her. Candace believed her brother could still be saved. Ding's students believed money could be taught like meditations. And James, well, maybe he believed the world was against him, and his sister had picked a side. You're in the courtroom again, this time in Taiwan. Ding is reading a statement, not an apology, a reflection. She talks about ambition, about wanting more for her family, about stepping into roles that weren't meant for women like me. Somewhere in that speech, there's truth buried deep under delusion. Thang sits beside her, silent. Looking down, they are sentenced again, not just to years, but to history. Because once your name becomes a headline, your life becomes a cautionary tale. People will tell their daughters, don't trust too quickly. People will tell their sons, don't ignore the warnings. And people will whisper about those two women in beige who tried to steal a life not with poison, but paperwork. You feel the chill in that stairwell all over again. And then you remember the bed, not a crime scene, a cradle, then a coffin. Same wood, same silence. 2 lives, 2 lies, and 1,000 tiny decisions that led to the moment no one could take back. Now you're left with the debris. Not crime scenes anymore, just what's left when the tape is taken down and the headlines fade. In Taiwan, Auntie moves away, quietly. No interviews, no books, no lawsuits. Just Distance. She leaves the apartment, the stairwell, the neighborhood convenience store that once sold her favorite rice buns, because every corner smells like memory now, and memory has teeth. In Georgia, Candace's daughter, barely a teenager, starts asking questions. Some you can answer, some you shouldn't. Like, why would Uncle James do that? Or, did Mom know? Or the one no one wants to answer. Am I safe? You can't promise anything. Because the scariest part of these stories isn't the violence. It's that they made sense to someone. That behind the hammer, the gun, the forged adoption papers. There was logic. Twisted, foggy, but logic all the same. That's what makes it real. You look at Ding's followers now. Many have cut ties, deleted posts, taken her photo off their walls, but a few still loyal, still whispering that maybe she just went too far out of love. One man, a former seminar student, even tries to start a petition for her early release. Calls her a visionary punished for her mother's sins. He garners 11 signatures, all from burner accounts. Still, the myth clings. Here's a quirky fact for your pocket. In ancient Greece, oracles could not be prosecuted, no matter how disastrous their prophecies. One falsely predicted victory, and a general lost 30 men. Still, the oracle went unpunished. Historians still debate whether oracles were ever meant to be right or just believed. That's the final twist in both tales. Ding was believed, so was James, for too long, until belief curdled into harm. You walk back through their timelines now. Rewind the tapes. The moment Auntie said no, the moment Candace said, "I'm done protecting people who won't protect me." You see it, don't you? That turning point. The one that doesn't look like a turning point at all, just a sigh, a shrug, a quiet close of a door. But the air shifted, and no one noticed. You're back at square one, but nothing's simple anymore. Two families, two crimes, both built on something that should have meant safety, kinship, trust, proximity. But sometimes, the people closest to you don't hold you up. Sometimes, they hold the knife. Let's go deeper. After her sentence, Ding doesn't disappear. She does something stranger. She files for appeal, claims the evidence was circumstantial, claims her aunt lied, claims the entire case was a narrative built on prejudice against powerful women. You almost want to admire the spin. Almost. She even gets interviewed illegally from inside prison. The footage gets pulled from the internet within hours, but not before clips circulate. She's wearing a beige uniform, hair tied back, voice just as polished as it was on stage. You hear her say, "I'm not a villain. I'm a daughter who believed in legacy." It's chilling, not because it's evil, because she believes it. You scroll through the comments beneath the leaked video. One says, "She was always too smart for prison." Another says, "Just wait, she'll bounce back." And then one that stays with you. Sometimes, family teaches you the wrong lesson about loyalty. Meanwhile, in Georgia, the cold case producers win an award for their coverage. But it feels empty. James is still behind bars. Candace is still dead. And the daughter, she gives one interview years later for a school project. She says, "I don't remember the gunshots, but I remember the silence after." She stares into the camera like she's looking through it and says, "I don't trust the word uncle anymore." You feel something collapse in your chest. That's the thing with betrayal. It teaches you new definitions for old words. Uncle, mentor, sister, love, and forgiveness. That one gets rewritten, too. Here's a strange piece of history. In Victorian England, a woman named Constance Kent confessed to killing her younger brother, but only 5 years after the crime, out of guilt. By then, someone else had already gone to prison. Historians still argue whether her confession was heroic or manipulative. You think of James, of Ding, of Thang, and wonder, do they feel guilt or just regret they got caught? The lines blur. You imagine them sitting in separate prison cells, two sides of the world. Same kind of silence, same kind of story. And you're starting to understand some crimes aren't about hate. They're about need. Twisted, miswired, desperate need. For money, for love, for control, for a version of family that no longer exists. maybe never did. Now the silence gets heavier because you're past the verdicts, past the headlines. You're in the years after, the slow burn of consequences. And here's what no one tells you about aftermath. It doesn't look like justice. It looks like avoidance, like family reunions with empty chairs, like school forms with a guardian's name scribbled over the word parent, like houses that don't get sold because no one can agree who owns them now. Auntie, from the stairwell, she's alive, but she walks slower now, looks behind her more, talks less. A friend says she doesn't go out much anymore, that she feeds stray cats and tends a balcony garden, and that every so often she stares at a blank sheet of paper like she's trying to rewrite something too broken to fix. Meanwhile, Ding's old followers have scattered. Some still believe they host quiet forums online, invite only, where they share screenshots of her old materials like relics. Others are angry, so angry they can't even say her name. You read one blog post from a former student. I didn't lose my money. I lost the version of myself who believed in it. That's the real theft, isn't it? The part of you that got conned wasn't your wallet. It was your optimism. And across the ocean, in Georgia, James is serving his time. But 5 years goes fast when nothing's really healed. By his 4th year, he starts writing letters. To whom? No one knows. None of them are sent. They find them later, stacked in a shoebox in his cell. Some are apologies, some are rants. One just says, I didn't mean to, but I did. And here's your historical shadow. In 17th century Germany, there was a legal term called Totschweigen, literally death by silence. It referred not to physical murder, but to the social erasure of someone too shameful to name. Historians still debate whether it was justice or just a tidy way to bury grief. James is Totschweigen now. No family visits, no news coverage, just whispers. Candace's daughter. She graduates high school. Quietly, there's no speech, but someone notices the inscription on her cap. She told the truth. I listened. You feel that like a punch through velvet? Not because it's dramatic, because it's all that's left. Truth, stained, complicated, unfinished, but real. Now the story starts to hum like an old radiator quiet, repetitive, full of heat that won't go away. You sit with the question that won't leave. How does someone get that far gone? Ding didn't wake up one morning and decide to swing a hammer. James didn't cradle a gun and think, this is who I want to be. It happened slowly, quietly, like rot behind wallpaper. You think about the psychology behind belief again. How it's easier to cling to a beautiful lie than face a disappointing truth. Ding told people they were just one mindset shift away from wealth. James told himself his sister didn't love him anymore. Both stories were untrue, but both were comforting in their own way. Because what's worse, being powerless or being a victim of someone else's betrayal. For people like them, agency, even violent, destructive agency, felt better than invisibility. Let's pull up something odd. In early 1900s Chicago, there was a series of inheritance-related murders where distant relatives killed elderly landowners after attending their church potlucks. They'd slip into their lives like shadows, write letters as if they were cousins. Some even got away with it for years. Historians still argue whether the court missed the signs or the townsfolk chose not to see them. Maybe it's both, because signs are only warnings if someone's willing to read them. And in both these stories, people read what they wanted. The students read Ding's designer shoes and slick branding. The community read James as troubled, but never dangerous. Even Auntie, who suspected something, kept inviting Than in for tea. Even Candace. Brilliant. Brave Candace kept giving James another chance. Because when it's family, the rules bend, and sometimes they break. You picture Than now, older, still in prison. A guard once told a journalist she has a perfect record. Knits during recreation, prays during meals, never raises her voice. And when people ask why she did it, she always says the same thing. I thought we were doing what was best. You hear that line and feel your stomach turn. Best for who? Best for Ding. Best for the legacy they thought they were owed. Best for the paper trail they were desperate to forge. Intent doesn't erase impact, but it does make the aftermath harder to sort because these aren't villains from novels. They're women who smiled in family photos. They're brothers who used to braid your hair. They're not shadows. They're just people, which somehow makes it worse. You're walking backward through memory now, not yours. Theirs. Ding's childhood photo floats across a courtroom slideshow. She's maybe 10 months holding a plastic cash register, grinning. James, age 8. In a school portrait, eyes wide, chin tilted like someone already bracing for impact. It's tempting to rewrite the story here. To say they were good once. To say something happened that broke them. But people aren't light switches. They dim slowly. Back in Taiwan, reporters dig into Ding's earliest ventures. Turns out, she was always hustling. Selling investment vision boards at age 16. Hosting pyramid skincare parties by 20. Never illegal, not yet. Just slippery. And in Georgia, James's file grows thicker. Not just minor theft. Delusional episodes, restraining orders from 2 ex-girlfriends, and 1 haunting entry from a psych eval presents signs of paranoid isolation. Believes his sister is keeping him from success. Candace had seen the file. She knew, but knowing and accepting are 2 different flavors of grief. There's a concept in family psychology called loyalty binds. It's when a person feels obligated to protect someone, even at their own expense, usually out of guilt, history, or trauma. Historians still argue whether it's noble or a slow form of self-erasure. You think of Candace, still filing James's job applications, still sending him grocery money, still trying to fix what wasn't hers to repair. And maybe Ding, too, caught in a bond with Than that looked like loyalty, but felt more like codependency sewn with gold thread. Because what do you do when the person who raised you also warps you? When you can do anything turns into you deserve everything. You lie, you scheme, you rewrite the rules. And if someone says no like Auntie did, you remove them. The real tragedy here, no one thought they were evil until it was too late. That whiskey bottle, still in evidence storage, label half peeled. A reminder that James didn't plan well, or maybe he didn't want to. There's a theory among criminal psychologists that some killers subconsciously leave trails not because they want to be caught, but because they want the world to see what happened to them. The wound before the weapon. Ding left trails. 2. She posted everything. Her fake success, her false mentorships, even the staged photos with borrowed luxury cars. It wasn't just a scam, it was a story, one she believed, until it turned into something else. Now you're in the quiet hours, the last stretch of a long, dark drive where you've stopped checking the clock and started checking your pulse. Because everything you've heard so far, the fake seminars, the forged documents, the brother with the bottle, the sister under the bed, has settled in your chest like static that won't shake loose. What do you even do with stories like these? You can't tuck them in a drawer. You can't call them rare and move on. Because deep down, you know they're not rare. Just quieter versions play out everywhere. In dinner tables filled with secrets, in polite phone calls layered with silent suspicion, in glances that say, I love you, and subtexts that whisper, but I might still ruin you. Let's take one last look at the legacy. Ding's seminars are gone. But the idea of millionaire mentorship lives on, repackaged daily by people selling hope in high heels. Than's silence lingers. She refuses parole, says she prefers routine. And James, released early for good behavior, but he doesn't go back home. He moves 2 states over, changes his name, works part-time at a tire shop. No one recognizes him except a true crime blogger who spots the tattoo on his wrist. When asked about his sister, he says nothing, not a word. But the mechanic he works with once told a local paper. Sometimes he stares at the floor for a long time, like he's waiting for it to open. Meanwhile, Candace's daughter, now in college, majors in criminology, writes her first paper on bias in cold case investigations. Her professor calls it devastating. You think of her and of Auntie, watering plants on her tiny balcony, humming a song no one else remembers. You think of how close they came to vanishing and how hard they had to fight just to remain real in a world that tried to erase them. Here's your final historical flicker. In 14th century Venice, there was a law requiring that any accusation of betrayal among kin had to be shouted publicly from a church bell tower so that the whole town could decide if it was true. Historians still debate whether that was justice or theater, maybe both. Because in the end, what are these stories if not public bell towers, warning signals, echo chambers, confessions too late to undo the damage? but maybe just in time to stop the next one. You listen to them now, not with fear, but with clarity, because truth doesn't scream, it lingers, and if you're quiet enough, it starts to make sense. So now you're here, at the edge of it all, where the noise has died down, the sentences are served, the blood has dried, and what remains is the echo of choices, not the dramatic kind, not the hammer, or the gun, or the missing whiskey bottle, but the smaller ones, the moment Ding stood on a stage for the first time and let applause rewrite her reality, the moment James stared at his sister's closed door and didn't walk away, the moment Than decided that a signature was just a formality if your intentions were pure enough, the moment Candace tired, brilliant, brave chose a family over safety. They're moments you miss if you blink, but moments that break the spine of a life. Because tragedy doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it's just a quiet click, a door locking behind you. You picture those spaces now. That hotel ballroom with the stage lights still faintly buzzing. The stairwell where Auntie once whispered why before the world went black. The bed frame where Candace was found. The ink-smudged adoption papers. The letters James never sent. They're all artifacts. Proof that stories don't need to end cleanly to leave a mark. And now, you know what's left behind. The survivors, the almost victims, the ones who walked away with nothing but breath in their lungs and silence in their throats. But they lived. They still water plants. They still write essays. They still look out of windows and remind themselves that survival isn't a headline. It's a habit. You lean back. The room's dark now, except for maybe the glow of your phone or a soft flicker from a fan. The stories are still circling, like slow waves rolling against the edge of your memory. But the tide is going out. You're not standing in that stairwell. You're not beneath that bed. You're right here, breathing slow, anchored to the safety of now. And maybe that's what bedtime stories like this are for. Not comfort, not fear, but perspective. So let the images blur now. Let the silence swell. Not with dread, but with stillness. Because truth can hurt, but it can also lull. And tonight, as the last names fade, you've made it to the end, still listening, still here, still whole.